Sup dudes, welcome to the Vaporwave dimension where dial-up internet reigns supreme and the global economy runs on Beanie Babies. I've been trapped in here for 3 days, but it's totally tubular because it means I have plenty of time to play some hella gnarly Nintendo games. I'm in hell.
The Nintendo 64. It's a console, and a pretty important one at that. It was Nintendo's third major home console, releasing at a time when new competitors were beginning to challenge Nintendo's dominance in the video game market. For example, Sony with their PlayStation. The Sega Saturn existed, I guess. Yeah, the N64 outsold the Saturn by a comfortable margin, but on the other hand, the N64 was outsold by the PlayStation by an even comfortabler margin. On the other hand, making fun of Sega is funny. Regardless, though, the N64 was an incredibly influential console. Even though it was outshined in the sales department, its impact on the gaming industry was huge. It presided over the transition to 3D for a ton of franchises and birthed a ton of new franchises as well. It's also home to a bunch of amazing games, several of which rank as some of the best and most influential titles of all time. The Nintendo 64 is a truly iconic console, and needless to say, it's earned its place in gaming history. The Nintendo 64's development is a tale as old as time, if time began in 1993. Basically, a computer manufacturer known as Silicon Graphics Inc. had a design idea for a new video game console, and they pitched it to, not Nintendo. Yeah, they went to Sega first, and they talked to Nintendo at some point shortly after. Accounts of how the negotiations went differ between the two companies. According to Sega, the higher-ups were quite impressed with Silicon Graphics' prototype, but some of their engineers found a few issues with the hardware, and although those issues were later resolved, Sega had already rejected the prototype at that point. Nintendo says Silicon Graphics chose them because they were just a better business partner, as Sega wanted exclusive rights to the technology while Nintendo didn't, and also because Nintendo had a, quote, phenomenal ability to drive volume. Whatever the fuck that means. At any rate, on August 23rd, 1993, Nintendo and Silicon Graphics announced Project Reality, a brand new 3D 64-bit Nintendo game console. On June 23rd, 1994, they revealed the name of the new system to be the Ultra 64. That name didn't last long. That was a good call by Nintendo. My parents almost named me Ultra 64, but thank God they didn't. I could have been some fucker who played Team Fortress 2 for 6,000 hours. The Nintendo 64 was officially shown to the public in playable form on November 24th, 1995 at Nintendo's Shoshinkai trade show. Nintendo had originally planned for a holiday 1995 release, but in true Nintendo fashion pushed it back to April of 1996, and then again to June. And finally, the Nintendo 64 launched on June 23rd, 1996 in Japan. It released on September 26th in North America and on March 1st of the following year in Australia and Europe. Except for France, they were on a timeout, so they got it that September. I got a Nintendo 64 and a couple games for it a little over a year ago, and since then they've been sitting on my shelf untouched. They are making a new circle of hell for me as I speak. But not anymore. Today I'm going to be taking a look at the Nintendo 64, and hopefully I can find out what happened to Nintendo's 1 through 63. Now let me be clear, this isn't a full-on review or retrospective per se. I didn't really feel like being the 1,000th person to gush about how, bro, the N64 is revolutionary, it brought us into 3D, and Ocarina of Time was a good game, and Mario 64 had a scary piano, and the controller was funny. Now this is more of a first impressions type of deal. It's just me, an idiot who grew up on the Wii and DS, trying out this system for the first time and evaluating it based on my personal experience. Today's the day that I finally get to see what this system was all about, and finally discover what it was like to be a 90s kid. Holy shit, it's a shape! Well, let's see what we got here. A couple of cables. What the hell are these? Fun fact, the Nintendo 64 uses composite cables. Apparently we gotta plug these into the TV. What is this, the Bronze Age?
I cannot click the book!
However, I got an adapter that converts the audio and video signals to HDMI, which then goes into my capture card, which then plugs into the TV. It's fine, I didn't want space anyways. And now it's time to add just one more cable as I plug in the controller. Ah, fuck me. Hey guys, the Nintendo 64 controller is weird, am I right? I mean, it is. My console came with this fun purple translucent one, and I never really cared that much for translucent controllers, to be honest. Like, wow, now I know that this thing has electronics in it. But hey, at least it's unique, and besides, the color is far from my biggest problem with this thing. I mean, look at it, it's got 3 prongs, this is a crime! It's got all the classic buttons, A, B, L, R, and the D-pad, but it has some added twists as well. A Z button on the back, some funny C buttons on the side, and a start button and analog stick smack dab in the middle. The placement of the analog stick annoys me more than it should. Like, this was a brand new controller feature that allowed you to move properly in a 3D space, which is pretty important considering all the new 3D games that were released on the N64. Most of the major games on the console that most people would be interested in playing use the analog stick. I would think that you'd want to show off these shiny new innovative titles and the completely new way to move around in them by making the analog movement feel good to use. But then why put the analog stick in a place that's so awkward and counterintuitive to how a player instinctually holds a controller? Like, yeah, I know, you're just supposed to hold it by the middle prong, it's not that big a deal, but it just doesn't feel right. Look, I'm a simple man, I see a controller, I take it by the horns. This is just sad. Not to mention, it arbitrarily cuts off use of certain buttons no matter how you hold it. Hold it how Nintendo wants you to, no D-pad or L button for you. Hold it like a civilized human being, your copy of Glover is a paperweight now. Hold it like this? Why would you hold it like this? Apparently, the controller was designed in the way that it was to try and accommodate both 2D and 3D gaming at the same time, adding a way to control an entirely new dimension of movement while still allowing developers to make intuitive 2D games rather than forcing them to adapt too quickly. However, you can still do that with controllers that don't look like abominations. Of course, it's easy to criticize past choices with the benefit of hindsight. 3D gaming was still in its infancy, and the N64 was the first console Nintendo ever made to feature this radically new gameplay style. What seems stupid nowadays may have been a lot more rational back then when we didn't know as much. I mean, England probably seemed like a good idea at the time. What else is there to whine about? Well, I guess I don't really like how the buttons feel, just kinda in general. I don't know, they just aren't satisfying to press and feel kinda cheap for some reason. But despite all my problems with it, there's still a part of me that likes this controller. It's so goofy, but that's what makes it so charming. I am genuinely interested to see what it feels like to actually play games with this thing. Of course, we need games to do that. I got 2 of them, Banjo-Kazooie and GoldenEye 007. These games are some all-time classics, and they show off 2 fairly different gameplay styles, with one being a 3D platformer and the other being a first-person shooter. Well, let's start off in alphabetical order with Banjo-Kazooie. Now this is a game. This is such a minor thing, and I'm gonna sound like such a baby for saying this, but it's interesting to me how these older consoles don't have startup menus. They don't waste your time with funky user interfaces. You press start and get right into the action, which saves you a solid 15 seconds every time you boot up a game. No wonder people were more productive back then, they had so much extra time. Now Banjo-Kazooie, man, this game is so charming. Even playing it for just a short while, it's easy to see why it's as beloved as it is. The setting and characters are whimsical and fun, the visuals are vibrant and colorful, the music and sound design are legendary. Not to mention, it's just a fun game to play. It's jank sometimes and definitely shows its age, but I enjoyed every second of it. Playing this game felt like I was being sucked into the magic of the N64 days in a way. It helped me understand what it was like to play this game and others like it back in that time period, when the Nintendo 64 was the latest technology and this was all you had. 3D platforming was completely uncharted territory at this point, yet Rare was still able to deliver an amazing experience that would set the stage for countless other games to follow in its footsteps. Banjo-Kazooie is a gem of a game, and I cannot wait to continue playing it, after I let it rot on my shelf for 5 to 10 years. Also, this game looks so bad, and I kinda love it. The image quality of the Nintendo 64 definitely caught me off guard at first. Like, I knew logically that the N64 was an old console and it's not gonna look that great, but it still looked worse than what I expected. I know I've seen plenty of footage of N64 games that looked a lot better than what I was seeing, though in hindsight it was probably footage from emulators or upscaled re-releases, or maybe people just having a better setup. I'm playing on a modern HD TV with a converted HDMI signal rather than an old CRT or something with the original cables, so that probably didn't help. But even though it took a little getting used to, it honestly kinda added to the whole playing it back in the day immersion. Seeing how games looked back then on the original hardware really gives you a better appreciation for those games and for how far gaming has come in the modern day. The one minor gripe I have is that Banjo-Kazooie actually lagged at points. It was infrequent and nothing too abysmal, but enough to be noticeable. For some reason, I've always thought of lag as a modern thing. As we all know, computer slowdown was invented in 2010. But this just goes to show that computer processors of all ages can struggle. At first, I thought it might have had to do with my setup. After all, the signal has to pass through 2 separate boxes before it even reaches the TV, but upon looking it up online, it seems like Banjo-Kazooie and other N64 games just kinda do that sometimes. Either way, not a huge issue, and it mainly only happened early on in the play session, but still something I definitely took note of. Anyway, on to GoldenEye. GoldenEye 007 is such an iconic title. It's famous for pioneering plenty of elements commonly seen in modern console shooters. It's got an expansive single-player mode and a legendary multiplayer mode. It's got an expansive single-player mode and nothing else. Anyway, starting it up for the first time, and my god, this game looks so bad! Look at all the characters, they're so low-res and funny-looking. And my god, these controls, they're so wacky and weird! Yeah, this game's controls are a bit clunky. Moving and aiming and shooting feel really awkward and take quite a bit of getting used to, but despite that, I don't feel like the controls are actually bad or poorly designed. I mean, Christ almighty, look at this thing. I hate to keep harping on the design of the N64 controller because it's been done to death already, but it's pretty clear that this thing isn't exactly conducive to a silky smooth first-person shooter experience. I think the developers did the best they could with the controls given the circumstances, and even though they're a little janky, they're totally serviceable, and I still had a lot of fun playing this game. I also want to note that this game could be a tiny bit confusing at some points. Or maybe I'm just an idiot. In the first mission, I was tasked with jumping off a specific ledge to go down a dam, and the text mentioned using these specific tools during the jump. I took that to mean that I had to find these things in order to do the jump. Cue 15 minutes of scrounging around to no avail before I eventually realized that all you had to do was walk up to the ledge, interact with it, and trigger a cutscene to complete the mission. On the second mission, I was told to meet up with Agent 006 in the bottling room, but I wasn't exactly sure which room was the bottling room, so when I got there and 006 ran up to me, I accidentally killed him thinking he was an enemy before he could utter a single word, and then I got gunned down by a horde of bad guys and decided that that was enough GoldenEye for one day. And yet, just in that short time, I really got what made GoldenEye such a cherished title for so many people. I was completely fucking around, guns a-blazing without a single ounce of precision or thinking, and I had a blast! It's incredibly primitive, but even despite all its limitations, I had so much fun playing it. There's just a magic to this game that makes it a really great time even today, and it's easy to see why it has the reputation that it does. Something that wasn't easy to see, though, was that one mystery island in the first mission that everyone always talks about. I just couldn't find the damn thing. Am I stupid? Am I dumb? Am I just a stupid dum-dum at GoldenEye?
So those are some of my first impressions of the Nintendo 64. Even though it's obviously aged a little, I mean it was released over 25 years ago, it still is quite a bit of fun to play, and it's easy to see why so many people have such fond memories of this system. Trying out some N64 games for the first time really gave me a much better appreciation for the magic of the console. They helped me step into the shoes of a kid growing up in the 90s when the N64 was a new, modern system. It was a really fun and unique experience. It was nice to finally try out some of the games that have been sitting on my shelf for so long. Hey folks, I just had the scariest dream. You wouldn't even believe it. I dreamt that I was actually playing the games that are in my backlog. Why would I do that?